Ever wonder what the samurai hierarchy actually looks like? Forget the movies. Most samurai weren't elite warriors. They were bureaucrats, administrators, and yes, sometimes just peasants holding spears. Let's break down the 9 levels of samurai society from bottom to top. Level 1. Ashigaru. Here's the thing. Ashigaru weren't technically samurai at all. They were peasant foot soldiers, farmers, fishermen, day laborers conscripted during wartime and handed cheap weapons, usually a bamboo spear with an iron tip, maybe a basic sword if they were lucky. Ashigaru had no formal training, no stipend, no land. They marched in massive formations, sometimes thousands strong, serving as cannon fodder for actual samurai armies. Their job was simple: hold the line, absorb arrows, and hopefully survive long enough to go home. Most Ashigaru fought because they had no choice. Their lord demanded bodies, and refusal meant death for their entire family. They wore minimal armor, often just chest plates. They slept in mud, ate whatever scraps were thrown their way, and died by the thousands in battles where their names were never recorded. This was the bottom, the absolute lowest rung, and most people who fought in feudal Japan were Ashigaru, not samurai. Next, level 2, we got a Ronin. Ronin means wave man, drifting, masterless. These were actual samurai who lost their lord. Maybe their daimyo backed the wrong side in the conflict and got wiped out. Maybe they got dismissed for failure. Either way, they had no master, which meant no stipend, no land, no status. Ronin kept their swords and their training, but they had no income. They became mercenaries, bodyguards, enforcers for merchants or bandits. Some taught swordsmanship, others gambled, many starved. The stigma was brutal. Japanese feudal society valued loyalty above everything. A masterless samurai was seen as a failure, someone who couldn't protect their lord or wasn't worth keeping. They lived on society's margins, one step above criminals. But here's what made Ronin dangerous. They had nothing to lose. No reputation to protect, no lord to shame. A salaried samurai might hesitate before violence. A Ronin wouldn't. This made them valuable as hired muscle and terrifying as enemies. Next, level 3, we have Gokunin. This was the entry point into the actual shogunate system. Gokunin were direct retainers of the shogun, the absolute lowest rank within that structure, but technically serving the most powerful man in Japan. Their stipend was tiny, barely enough to rent a small house in the capital and maintain basic samurai appearance. Proper clothes, maybe a servant, minimal armor. Many Gokunin worked side jobs just to survive, but the rank gave them something crucial: access. They could enter the shogun's castle. They had official standing. If they played their cards right and climbed a ladder, showed competence in administration, they could advance. The Gokunin rank was a foot in the door, nothing more. Most Gokunin never met the shogun. They handled low-level bureaucracy, copying documents, delivering messages, attending minor ceremonies. Unglamorous work, but it was stable employment in a violent world. Next in level 4, we see Han Samurai. These were provincial samurai serving regional lords far from the capital. Han Samurai were middle-class warriors, comfortable but not wealthy, respected but not powerful. They received a regular stipend from their domain, usually paid in rice, enough to support a family, keep servants, maintain armor and weapons. Their job was local administration, collecting taxes, settling disputes, maintaining order, drilling with the domain's military. Here's the catch though. Most Han Samurai lived their entire lives in peace. The Tokugawa period lasted over 250 years with almost no major warfare. So these samurai trained constantly for battles that never came. They practiced swordsmanship, studied military strategy, maintained their weapons, all for conflicts that didn't exist. Many supplemented their income by teaching, doing calligraphy, or other side work. The samurai class was required to maintain certain appearances, and stipends didn't always cover it. Provincial samurai lived decent lives, but advancement was nearly impossible if their lord wasn't connected to the shogunate. Next, level 5, we see Hatamoto. Now, we're getting into the real power. Hatamoto, meaning under the banner, were elite samurai whose families have served the Tokugawa shogunate since its founding. About 8,000 families held this rank. Their stipends were substantial. Large houses in the capital, multiple servants, extensive landholdings. But the real power was access. Hatamoto had to write of audience with the shogun. When summoned, they entered the inner chambers. They saw his face. They spoke directly to him. Most Hatamoto worked as administrators in the shogunate bureaucracy.
They handled finances, oversaw construction projects, managed foreign relations, investigated corruption. This was where real governance happened, not on battlefields, but in meeting rooms with documents and seals. Their positions were hereditary. A Hatamoto's son inherited the rank, the stipend, the responsibilities. This created a permanent administrative class that ran Japan for centuries. They weren't warriors anymore. They were bureaucrats with swords. Next, level 6, we got Tozama Daimyo. Daimyo were feudal lords, the big players. They controlled entire provinces, commanded thousands of soldiers, collected taxes from hundreds of thousands of people. But there were two types of daimyo, and Tozama were the distrusted ones. Tozama daimyo came from families that either opposed the Tokugawa during the Wars of Unification or submitted late. The shogunate never forgot. These lords controlled huge domains, some of the largest in Japan, but they were kept under constant surveillance. The shogunate used clever tactics to control them. Tozama daimyo had to spend alternate years in the capital away from their power base. They needed permission for major construction projects. They were excluded from high government positions. They had wealth and local power, but the shogunate made sure they could never threaten the system. Many Tozama daimyo were competent administrators who ran the domains well. But they were always outsiders, always watched, always one wrong move from having their lands confiscated. Next, level 7, you will find Fudai Daimyo. These were the inner circle. Fudai Daimyo came from families that supported Tokugawa Ieyasu before his final victory. They were rewarded with smaller domains than the Tozama, but they held real political power. Fudai daimyo filled the highest government positions. They served as advisors to the shogun, ran major administrative departments, governed key strategic locations. The shogunate trusted them because their family's fortunes were tied to Tokugawa's survival. Their domains were typically smaller and less wealthy than the Tozama territories, but their political influence was massive. They decided policy. They controlled access to the shogun. They approved or denied requests from other lords. A Fudai daimyo in the right position could destroy rivals with paperwork alone. Next, moving up ladder, level 8 is Shimpan daimyo. Shimpan were blood relatives of the Tokugawa family, cadet branches close enough to matter. They controlled some of the largest, richest domains in Japan. On paper, they were incredibly powerful. In practice, the shogunate kept them neutralized. Shimpan daimyo were deliberately excluded from the government. They couldn't hold office. They couldn't influence policy. Why? Because they were potential heirs. If the main Tokugawa line died out, succession fell to the Shimpan families. This made them both essential and dangerous. The shogunate gave them wealth and prestige, but kept them politically impotent. They spent their time on arts, scholarship, and cultural pursuits, harmless activities that kept them visible but powerless. Some Shimpan daimyo accepted this arrangement. Others quietly built networks, maintained correspondence with other lords, and waited for opportunities that rarely came. The apex, level 9, we got Shogun, the top, absolute ruler of Japan. The shogun commanded the military, set national policy, and controlled the country's feudal system. Daimyo obeyed or faced destruction. The emperor in Kyoto was a ceremonial figurehead. The shogun held real power. But this power came with a prison. The shogun couldn't leave the castle grounds without massive ceremony. He couldn't walk freely. He couldn't have privacy. Every word was recorded, every action analyzed, every meal tested for poison. The shogun's daily life was an endless series of ceremonies, audiences, and administrative decisions. Ministers presented reports. He approved or denied. Another minister appeared. More reports, more decisions. The bureaucracy never stopped. This was the paradox of ultimate power. The shogun controlled everything but experienced nothing. He lived in the most luxurious palace in Japan and couldn't enjoy a simple walk in the garden without 40 attendants watching his every move. Outside the castle walls, millions lived their lives. Inside, there was only duty, ceremony, and the crushing weight of absolute authority. That's the samurai hierarchy. From disposable foot soldiers to imprisoned god rulers, each rank was its own world with its own rules, pressures, and realities. The swords were real, but most samurai never used them. They pushed papers, collected taxes, attended ceremonies, and navigated a bureaucracy as deadly as any battlefield.